and I'm just gonna officially welcome you all to the second edition of our arts/practice-based research seminar series, which I now call Rebellious Research, which I hope people relate to in one way or another. Just a very, very brief reminder. So this seminar is something I created at the beginning of the last academic year. All the sessions are happening online on the last Wednesday of each month at this time, so from 3:30 to 5 p.m. UK time. They're all free and open to all, and I really, really am absolutely excited about the selection of amazing guests I secured for this second edition. And the last kind of housekeeping thing is that all the sessions are recorded and they are shared on YouTube for you to kind of catch up with later after the sessions. So I left my website here where you can find a full program, but obviously for all of you who are here in a meeting, you probably know how to find it. So not gonna go through this, but we're gonna have 9 sessions altogether, and you can find all the details about who will be our guests and what the content is on the website. And without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome Dr. Agnieszka Piotrowska, who's going to be talking about tentacular thinking in creative practice research as a radical intellectual gesture. So Agnieszka, I'm just going to leave it with you. If you could be so kind to introduce yourself, and it's all yours. Thank you so much.
Okay. So hello and welcome. Thank you so much, Agata, although we, of course, are beginning to be known as a Polish mafia here, which we don't mind. And actually, I was thinking how interesting it is that there are all these, you know, different ethnic minorities in the government, but somehow not Poles. There's a whole other story about that, and I don't know why that is. But anyway, I'm going to try and find my PowerPoint, which we've rehearsed, so it should be okay. Okay, so can you see it? Yes? I got it, yeah, okay. So let me just see. So, I mean, I'm a visiting professor at Gdańsk University, and now I'm a reader at the Manchester School of Art, at SODA, and I've done a variety of other things. I think I've loaded the wrong, I hope it's not the wrong. I think we're going to go with it, whatever it is. So I am going to talk about my research and introduce myself, and it will be indeed, it's kind of linked to the article which I've published recently, and some practice in the International Journal of Creative Media Research. So it's a plug for that, and I hope you're going to read the whole thing. So I'm just going to throw some ideas around and show you some work that I've done, some practice work, and how in my mind it all kind of joins together. But you know, we can see if you think it does or it doesn't in due course. So I've worked in the industry before doing the PhD as a documentary filmmaker. This is a piece of work which I am well known for, still, about women who fall in love with objects and not people. And I always mention it because, in a way, even before my kind of academic work, this is kind of important in terms of where I stand, even in terms of subverting heteronormative ideas and patterns. And also, that piece of work, I think, was in some way, in some small way, it's been quite successful globally, but also was, I think, because maybe it did contribute to knowledge of some sort, knowledge of us as people, also in terms of what defenses we can deploy, but also just thinking about other ways of being in the world, not only as a heteronormative couple, for example. So I've since I finished my PhD 10 years ago, I've written some books, and this is the two in the middle are monographs, and the edited collections as well. And the Psychoanalysis and Ethics. This book is going to second edition next year. And the Creative Practice Research in the Age of Neoliberal Hopelessness is the book, which is an edited collection, and which kind of
I think we've lost Agnieszka right now. Okay, I just hope we're gonna reconnect in a second. Okay. I think she froze right now. Okay, I'm sure she's gonna be back in a second. Oh, Agnieszka.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can right now, yes.
Okay, well, this is going to be problematic if this keeps going on. But anyway, let's keep going on and see how we go. And well, and hopefully the network will improve. So the Nasty Woman book about the female authorship and the figure of the nasty woman in contemporary cinema is something that I have also deployed in my practice. So I suppose what I want to talk about is the notion of why we may need theory, like high theory, history of art in creative practice, and how, in a way, I believe that it is in the current situation helps us in terms of education being a site of transgression. And here I evoke Bell Hooks, of course, who talks about education needing to be a site of transgression, a site of freedom. And those of you who know the article, you may remember that she talks about arriving at Stanford at a graduate seminar and being bored and feeling that there was just an attempt to make her be obedient to various ideas rather than try to think for herself. And so this whole idea of both in research and in education and teaching students, how do we offer resistance to the notion that we just all have to fit into tidy boxes, that our research and our thinking and our creativity and our making things need to be easily measurable, and it has to be a commodity like other things. What do we do? What do we say? Because it is kind of quite, in a way, could evoke depression and despair almost. So one of the ways that I suggest in the article, and I want to talk to you about it today, is this Donna Haraway's idea of tentacular thinking, meaning, of course, using different ways of thinking and being in the world, not just one theoretical paradigm. I mean, some of us, I mean, as I say, I finished my PhD 10 years ago at Bergbeck. It was a great institution, but very much I was told, once you choose the theoretical paradigm, you have to stick to it. This is what we do, otherwise it becomes messy and it could create all kinds of issues. Whereas actually I'm saying, let it be a little bit messy. And particularly in creative practice, this is a good thing that it's messy because it could be generative. Now this, for a lot of people, even as a proposition, is problematic, because, you know, what if students then lose their way? Well, you know, let them lose their way a little bit. We as educators could still be there to help and as creative practitioners, I think it's essential to be able to give ourselves the freedom of thinking across different paradigms. Now, in the article and also here today, I wanted to mention surrealism. Now, let me tell you that now I hardly can see any of my slides. So literally just as well, because of the internet, I think. So I hope you can see them better. But fundamentally, I like surrealism, and I always give it as an example, as something which is kind of a classic thing of modern classic of using theory and practice together. But also, if you think about it, it comes, so surrealism as the art historical movement comes from practice, meaning clinical practice, of course, Sigmund Freud and so on. The practice in itself, one would argue, was patriarchal. However, within it, it still had these kind of seeds of subversion because of the acknowledgement of the unknowable That is the unconscious. And so what we see here in terms of art history is that the practice, the clinical practice, is then grabbed by surrealists and made into theoretical move with the Andre Breton, and then the artists start creating around it, and then all kinds of other people use it in their ways, consciously and otherwise. And I think this is really important to consider how, and even today I was talking to students and they're MA students, so I hadn't taught them before, and it was quite surprising how they vaguely know about surrealism, even though, as I will evoke in a minute, it has in some way been experiencing a sort of renaissance in terms of ideas, of course. But just briefly, just about surrealism, is the notion of the unknowable, which is being considered historically very in terms of the unconscious and using the dreams as an inspiration for creation. That as a proposition historically has been considered very dangerous. So for example, in Poland, where I come from, under communism, this was psychoanalysis was forbidden, precisely of the notion that you can't control who you are, that there's something else and not the rational in the world that one can consider. But of course, surrealists say, no, let it be marvelous, the marvelous, let it free our creativity. Let us, I mean, they're not using the word tentacular, but it's not dissimilar idea to go and also, very importantly, to be able to use different ideas in one space. So it's back to the kind of notion of tentacular, and in terms of course, visually. So I just want to remind people that this year's Biennale, of course, was inspired by surrealism, and it was also feminist at the same time, because often, I think unfairly, there's a suggestion that it was a very patriarchal movement. I actually really don't agree with that. But also, interestingly, the Biennale, which in some way was at least tried to be a site of transgression and very much advancing and promoting female and feminine as well, voices in art and creativity, chose that the surrealism as a sort of inspirational force. And also, as I said in my article, quite surprisingly, at the same time at Tate Modern, there was the big exhibition showing the influence of surrealism globally, which I think is important and interesting. So I want to show you some of my work as well soon, and hopefully the internet is going to bear it, because in the end we've decided I will play it from here. But it's in some way also the notion which talks to the Agata's other events of the communities and communications. In some way, we are a community, we are a virtual community, and I think it's wonderful that we're beginning to meet this way, and hopefully we'll meet in person. And then there's this whole notion of what kind of community we are, and drawing from a variety of thinkers. I like to think that the unconscious is linked to the spiritual, and in other not just methodologies, but ways of thinking about the world. For example, in Zimbabwean or Hindu, the notion that there's a parallel world almost that is just as real as this material world that we inhabit, that world in terms of the beliefs, the oral traditions, the mythologies and so on, is just as real. And in some way, I could also imagine that it's the idea of holding the different ideas in one space, even though we're using different words as well. So I'm going to maybe talk to you now about my practice. So if you're talking about a variety of ideas, and surrealism being for me very important and influential, but of course, if you know, Tentacular.
I apologize, everyone. We might be experiencing this kind of disruptions, but I'm sure we'll have Agnieszka back in a second. Oh, I think we have you back, Agnieszka.
Yeah, I think we should have. I should have sent.
And you lost again. That's the beauty of our online meetings. I mean, obviously there's lots of benefit of having online meetings because we can have people from everywhere, but yes, you're back again. Great.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you right now, yes.
Okay, so I was just going to talk to you about my work in Zimbabwe. It's important to mention it, to talk for me. It's been a lot of, I've spent a lot of time there, obviously, and dealing with, the work is kind of about collaborative bridges that one can build from different cultures, acknowledging my white privilege because I'm a white European, but trying to move not away from it, but also working creatively with artists from different cultures when they've invited me to work with them. So this project, Repented, which in some way you'll see, I'm just going to show a tiny bit, which is just as well, I think, and because of the internet issue. But it's a hybrid drama. It's a collaboration with Stanley Makua, who's acclaimed Zimbabwean theatre maker and writer and playwright, and he invited me to be involved in his work because he liked my other work, so really in a traditional way. The relationship was not traditional in so far that he was very interested in my approach to femininity, but also female. This is the nasty woman idea, the female possibility of feminine power and even violence. Now, this is in some way in his work, dreams and the spiritual sense and the unconscious definitely play a role. And he liked the fact that I, as a thinker and as an artist, engage with it. And then he very much was interested in, and myself as well, in the notion of how history and politics influence personal relationships between people, and in this way between a Black couple. So I'm going to try and play a tiny bit and we see how we go here. Can you see it, Agatha?
I think you muted Agnieszka.
In terms of another piece of work which I did in Zimbabwe a few years ago, again, it's a research project because it looked at film noir, but also looked at the notion of dreams and psychoanalysis and the unconscious, and to what end, at the same time, holding in one space, spirituality, Zimbabwean belief in some, as I say, very strong belief in some other parallel kind of life that goes on. So that piece of work was important to me because it was kind of both a collaborative thing, but also trying to see how, and I was working very much with co-writers, how can some of these ideas, which are Western ideas, be adapted or translated, and how vice versa the Zimbabwean ideas of spirituality can be applied in this piece of work. Now, I'll play it now and see if it plays. Okay, so that kind of thing was quite an interesting experience on many levels. And what I learned, for example, the cultural limits of discussing desire, sexual desire, which of course is hugely important in psychoanalysis and surrealism. And it was, in terms of the representation, in some way I feel with that project that some mistakes were made on my part. And then going forward, I tried to do things differently a little bit, which I'll show you in a minute. But in terms of my whole practice, because it's often important to say to oneself, what is your practice? So my practice is very much still making films, experimental work, but also making video essays, which use, I suppose, excerpts of films and archive as found footage. And this is in order to explore scholarship in some ways, and again, in the way I see my practice and I see the world, it's possible to do all these things, and to my mind, they're in some way connected. So just a couple of really examples of how my theoretical work on the nasty woman, a representation of and creation of a character of the nasty woman, contemporary female authorship in cinema, how it translated itself into some, I suppose, more traditional film work in Zimbabwe, working with artists there and looking at strong, powerful female characters who are subverting the heteronormative in many ways, but then also reflecting on that in video essays and writing and academic writing. So I think for me, and it's just for me, I understand that different people have different approaches, but for me, my writing is also my practice, and whilst it's different, it's kind of not completely different. It connects to it. So this is just a couple of examples of the video essays which have been published, and they both deal with female authorship and female. We're having challenges here. Hold on, let me see if I can switch the lights back on. Okay. So, okay, so let's just, I don't know if I can play a tiny bit here. So they are quite differently constructed as a piece of work, which I think some of it might be able to show you in terms of, in terms of the research, this was also a sort of craft research, and I was working with an editor, the same editor on, actually it's the same editor on all of these pieces of work. So we are very much collaborators, and it's a collaborative kind of effort. And so in terms of craft, they're made quite differently. One is very much, so let's see if I can show some of it. One of them is completely driven by clips and ideas without any commentary, and the other one is rather driven by commentary and narration of some sort. So let's see. Can you see it together? So in this video, I was also kind of looking at Audre Lorde's ideas about, so the, the nasty woman is the woman who subverts patriarchy, but opposed to the femme fatale in the contemporary female authorship, she survives, because the femme fatale traditionally is always killed off, or she gets married, but she disappears. So the subliminal message is that if you try to subvert the patriarchal, then you will perish. So I was interested in terms of, I suppose, traditional academic research and looking at the current trends in which the strong women survive. I mean, there's lots to say about it, but one of the ideas which I also was interested in it, which is very much the Audre Lorde's idea of trying to reclaim the erotic. And she was saying the erotic was in a way hijacked by men. So then we were sort of, we almost forgot to think about the erotic as a life-giving source, which we women can reclaim in different ways. So there's a little bit here I'll show you. Anyway, I also looked and compared the representation of violence and Blue Velvet and Gone Girl. And as I say, this is very much still in the same video essay, which I've also used and use all the time as a tool for teaching, in terms of talking to students and, for them, and students really respond to it well, because they like, to see for themselves very quickly how these ideas come together. And then another video essay which I made was about female desire in 3 films made by women, and this was published, so you can see it still very much in the Feminist Encounter. It's both the article and a video essay. And what I found really interesting about looking at these things carefully is that the filmic language was very much not dissimilar, even though they're such different pieces of work. So in terms of the iconography, the imagery, it really was quite similar. The narratives, though, these are the films by Jane Campion, Celine Sciamma, and Agnieszka Piotrowska, and the narratives, you know, you could almost see them, how they're struggling to subvert the patriarchal, but somehow in the 2 films out of 3, the narrative still takes you back to the couple. So the very Oedipal kind of patriarchal resolution in the narrative. They're nasty, they survive, which is great, but then they end up possibly, one could argue, domesticated, even in Celine Sciamma's film. And even though there is a lesbian encounter between the 2 women, but of course one chooses to get married, whereas in the Agnieszka Piotrowska's film, and she comes from the most patriarchal, strictest of the 3 in Poland, her narrative resolution is different. And I was interested as a creative practitioner and a maker to show these things. And let's see if I can show you a tiny bit of it.
I think you're muted, Agnieszka.
Okay, so I'm just showing you some of my kind of, I will come back to more kind of classic filmmaking at the very end, although it's and that's the one in the journal. But I just wanted to stay a little bit longer with the video essay because I think it's a really interesting form, and a lot of people use it, begin to think about it, use it differently. Again, in the classic academy, it's still considered a kind of suspect and suspicious vehicle for exploration of scholarship. And I think that at least in terms of us introducing our students to it, I think it's really is very interesting, both creatively and in terms of Okay, so I will just see if I can get to it. Let me see. So I'm going to show you, hopefully, yeah. So I want to show you this piece of work as an example of, again, you know, because I'm sure you're going to say, well, you talk about surrealism, but some of the work we don't even see how it's connected to surrealism. And I said that's fine too. If you don't see the connection, because the important thing is that I see the connection, and the connection is the unconscious, the unknowable, the desire, and how one deals with it. But of course, psychoanalytical thinking is also to do with trauma. And that is the unrepresentable in psychoanalytical thinking, meaning you can't talk about real trauma. So I made this video, which I only show you a little bit of, in which talks about, which combines a variety of styles, which is, but in terms of scholarship, it looks at two films, a Polish film called Minor Genocide and Waltz with Bashir, but then it introduces the idea, controversial maybe or not, which says that the feminine voice, the feminine ways of thinking about the world, and then I introduce here Olga Tokarczuk, that maybe, regardless of gender, it could be useful in discussing trauma. So let me show you a little bit of it. Okay, so in obviously this is much longer piece of work, but I invited the filmmaker and the writer to the Visible Evidence conference in Gdańsk, which I held just last summer. And in the conversation, obviously, there was the really interesting collaborative work between two women, and also the transgenerational trauma, the relationship with the mother, the relationship between all the animators, and one of them was also the writer's daughter. But also later, you know, once we've kind of got through all the painful stories, I did have a conversation about, because as you could see, the work kind of works, you know, uses live action, animation, and archive. And interestingly and honestly, I promise I didn't put the ideas into their minds, but Natalia Korinska-Gruz said that really, again, she felt that surrealism was very important in terms of her thinking and the permission that it gave her to create work which was so hybrid. So just the very last thing that I will show you a little bit of is the latest thing, and that was the piece which was published in the same article and in the Journal of International Creative Media Research. So this is the work which, in a way, is narrative. It's a hybrid short documentary, which this was a collaborative work with the professor in the immunology department in Edinburgh, and Francisca Motapi, and also working with the colleagues and collaborators in Zimbabwe, very much building on my work there. And it's the idea is, I suppose, it's activist to a certain extent, meaning trying to, so it was made so it's shown for the NGOs in this country and globally, with a view to understand the community, that NGO workers might have the best intentions to improve the situation of the community, but it doesn't work if the community is not in agreement what they want. And in this particular story was the issue of the toilets that the researchers, including very much Zimbabwean researchers and the British and other researchers, wanted to build toilets in this village. There was a resistance on the part of the women, and it transpired that they didn't want the toilets because they treated their walk to leave themselves to the bush or somewhere as a space for communication. And instead of toilets, they wanted education and, in fact, mobile phones. So I'll just show you a little bit of it, because you'll see the language that I led a team and I deployed is very kind of, you could say multimodal, but it's also very much using tentacular thinking from a variety of sorts, including gender, decolonial, and of course, psychoanalytical thinking. So let's see. think I'm going to stop playing it now and stop sharing, so we could have, and you can see the whole piece of work in the journal at Agata Edits. And maybe I can just say one thing here, I'll stop sharing, that with this piece of work, I think it's important to say, for me, it was very important to continue the work with the collaborators, but also what I have learned from that project in terms of lots of things, in terms of working with other people, 3 animators, and we can talk about it, but in terms of thinking, it was also very important that the line of difference in that particular project was not across the lines of embodiment, meaning black, who is black and who is white, but rather across the lines of education and class. Because Francisca found the resistance to her ideas just as hard as other colleagues. And she had to relearn, really, or learn what the life in rural Zimbabwe meant. And when she approached me to try and think about how we could work on it together, of course, it was very humbling. It was a great privilege. And I did suggest that whether I was the right person to lead the team. And she was very insistent because of my other work, rather than, you know, what I look like or where I come from. But there is something to talk about here as well, I think, and maybe we can talk about it, Agata, going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka. It's really fascinating. I mean, there's so many things we can unpack here, and as always, I'm just really grateful for for you to share all your amazing work. I think one thing I would like to start with, and it really made me think quite a lot when you were talking about your work, and when we're looking at fragments of your films, when you told us about your books, we looked at fragments of your video essays. I really liked how you say that even your writing is a form of practice for you. I've never heard anyone say that. It's quite inspiring. And obviously the reason we run this seminar is to help people work with projects which are, considered practice research or practice-based research. So I think the first question I would like to ask you is, how do you decide? I know it might be a difficult question when you start a new project. How do you decide whether you're going to work on a film, on a video essay, or whether this is going to be a written work, and how this process develops? Because obviously it's probably not very straightforward from the beginning. I would just like to know the kind of behind the scenes a little bit, if you don't mind.
Well, because I was originally a filmmaker very much in the industry, so, and I ran a company and I was, BBC trained, and then I was doing stuff for National Geographic and Discovery, but also very much it was a commercial enterprise. I was very much trying to keep my integrity, and I did. But it's very different working with clients, but there are some themes I think that you can see in my work, like I mentioned the Married to the Eiffel Tower, but also other things. So there's always the theme of kind of love and betrayal, maybe, and the relationship between power and knowledge. So these are the themes that I've been interested in, always, and going to different countries and different cultures, like you, Agata, as well, and learning how other cultures and people deal perhaps with the same challenges as all of us. And for me, then, the PhD is a big rupture, obviously. And my PhD was, which was published in psychoanalysis and ethics in documentary film. But really what it's about is also about strong attachments between the filmmaker and the subject of her film. So the kind of theme of love goes across. And then the things which I'm interested in currently, the Zimbabwean adventure was both because I was asked by the British Council to go then do some small work, and then it sort of grew and various things were sort of unfolded. So a little bit I was sort of meanderingly in a tentacular sort of way, letting things happen. But then, some things, I know I do really like writing, and I like writing. Sometimes you kind of pause it. And I also, as a project which is very much the same project of pushing the boundaries of the academy, I try to make my academic writing also accessible, so it pushes it's the whole kind of what is acceptable as the academic writing, which is why I see it as creative practice also.
That's a fantastic comment, and we kind of had, even though at that time I didn't realize that this is exactly what we were talking about to some degree. We had this conversation, obviously, when we were talking about your article for the journal, which is quite interesting. I guess also kind of if I could follow up from that question, if you don't mind, and of course I will open to you know, for the audience questions in a second. But I would like to think, because you also mentioned education and freedom for you know, for us as educators and students, and so let's imagine for a second we supporting PhD candidates, PhD students working with creative practice, and of course it's really, and I really loved how you say how kind of you have kind of this messiness of creative practice over there, and of course we are constrained with things which are kind of imposed on us by academic rigor and regulations and all these kind of things we could talk about for a long time. So how do you think we can guide our PhD students who work with creative practice, who work with film-based creative practice, who have this option you had, or you keep having, you know, between choosing, well, am I going to make a film? Am I going to write about it? Is it going to be a video essay? Perhaps it's going to be something completely different. And I'm going to kind of dive deeper in this, because obviously with your work, we kind of go to another level of this, because if we look at your recent film, it's not only that this is just a film, but you mix fiction with non-fiction, you mix a kind of animations, but even within animation, it's not just one, you have lots of contributors, so there's lots of layers to unpack over there, which is quite fascinating. How do you guide people? How can we, you know, find a way to guide other people, young researchers, to kind of follow this kind of work and don't feel intimidated at the opportunities which are out there?
I mean, obviously, different people will think about it differently, which is great as well. I think that not even necessarily PhD students, but even certainly any students, but at the MA level, it's really interesting to listen, because a lot of, I mean, young people have lots of wonderful ideas, and a lot of them are really good technically, certainly a lot better than I am. There's no comparison even, because they kind of breathe the technology, whereas, you know, maybe it simply because it's their language that they deploy. But what I think I almost have the sense that there's this appetite for a more profound conversation, also based on some stuff that they need to learn about. You know, as I said, how can you be transgressive if you don't know what you're talking about? You know, you need to know. I mean, the surrealism is just an example because it's my thing, psychoanalysis and so on, but anything else you touch, it's problematic if you really, of course you can, if you're quite clever, you can make something up out of nothing, but I think it's helpful and also gives people confidence if they know about other things and cinema and other work. You know, I love teaching Pedro Almodovar, for example. Pedro Almodovar is both controversial, experimental. Some of it is really, really, really controversial. And the conversation about it with young people when they have points of reference. So, for example, in terms of, you know, how does it relate to surrealism, say, talk to her. How is it experimental? Is it completely, I mean, talk to her probably would never, just couldn't be made anymore. And the, you know, the ethical elements of it, I think that there is, as I say, my big gesture is that I feel that almost we have been like conned into thinking that somehow ignorance is a good thing, that somehow, you know, being intellectual is sort of old hat and is not useful for men or beasts. Why would you be an intellectual? Learn the latest software. And I think it's nonsense, because the latest software will change in 2 weeks or 2 months' time, or 2 years. Whereas maybe if you've learned how to think and how to challenge our very teachers, us, then maybe, just maybe, you'll go into changing the world, and certainly will help you get a job for sure. You know, in terms of the whole getting a job thing, if I can just say, of course, people who can fabulously, you know, create a 3D model probably will get a job. But again, even that, if you want, everybody wants to be a director. I mean, fine. If you want to be a director, you do need to know about art history, literature, and philosophy, or at least I think it helps. So it's not instead, it's great to make stuff, but I would personally always ask people to read. I mean, a PhD student of mine, a new PhD student, is doing work on testimony to do with all kinds of traumas. And I asked him to read Judith Butler's Giving an Account of Oneself, because I think it's going to be very helpful, even though it's challenging. But I understand not everybody agrees with that. I really do.
Which I think is also a valid point, because you also mentioned that at the beginning of your talk, like how important it is, and that's also links to education, but also for us as researchers, the question of really thinking for yourself and sometimes questioning things, and not necessarily just taking everything on board, but just having this kind of critical mind, which is again very useful also when it comes to the creative decisions when you make your films and things like that. I have a million of questions, but I think it's probably a good idea to open for some questions for people who are in the meeting. So if you just want to either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask a question, or type your question in the chat. Let's do that first, and then I can obviously
also not necessarily a question, but a comment and just an opening of a conversation.
I think we had so many things here that it's kind of difficult to. Okay, Jess, go. You need to unmute yourself, Jess.
Sorry. Hi, thank you very much for this. Is really thought provoking. I'm kind of working out very quickly, and I read all the information that Agatha sent in the first place. So I've had a few days to think about your work and how you've progressed. One of the things I'm sort of wondering about, and whether it had been considered, obviously with your depth of knowledge you have considered it, but it wasn't mentioned, was in the film Wash. I felt that there was some kind of, and do you are you considering this of the collective unconscious of Jung, when there's this discussion about the groups of people and how they go off and decide to go to a blute, wherever, and it isn't just an individual happening, is it? No, is that something that you sort of considered within the film, or is that something that I'm just thinking because I'm a bit weird?
Yes. No, you're not at all weird. And thank you very much for this wonderful comment and question. I mean, I think there are two things. I think that if you do work, the knowledge is really helpful, because it's at the back of your mind. You don't always have to say, oh, look. and in fact, the Wash just kind of has this one thing to say to people: don't assume that in any community, even if you want to do good, that's what people want. And even if you're completely right, you proceed slowly and do both things. But of course you totally, and whilst I'm not a Jungian, I'm a Lacanian, but of course I know a lot about Jung, and because it's kind of fascinating, and absolutely. I mean, I think in these system of beliefs, particularly in Zimbabwe, which I do know about, one could absolutely say that there's such clear connections with Jung that it really is almost uncanny. Absolutely and definitely. And the whole sense of the masculinity, the anima, the animus, what it all means, how does it work together, what can be the dark side, the light, how can it be resolved? It really is extraordinarily. If you look at some of my other work, I mean, the Repented is published in Screenworks. That actually, again, I don't say, hey, oh, look, this is Jung, but it's there. It's exactly what you're saying, and there's some kind of links from this other layer of what exists is there. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a wonderful comment. Thank you.
Do we have other questions from the audience? If not, I'm going to take it as an opportunity to ask more questions because I have plenty. Okay, I'm just going to ask another one if I can, because this is really interesting, and then there's lots of obviously debate when it comes to film as form of research, and again, practice research, and this idea of how you don't necessarily put aesthetics kind of at the front in some cases, how it really is more about kind of trying to kind of get your research answers through your practice. Really, what you do is really interesting because obviously, again, I'm going back to WASH at the moment and how beautiful the animations are. And I know, again, we had this discussion briefly kind of outside of this meeting, really, and I really love the idea how you, as I said, have different styles of animations as you know, as a way of different people working on the project, contributing to it. And I would like to hear more about this idea of how kind of very, very beautiful aesthetics from your contributors come together into this film, which is a research project, and how it works together in this kind of seamless way. Would you mind talking a little bit about that, please?
I mean, one of the things, as you will all know about practice research, is that if it works, then perhaps it might like to be quite kind of not incredibly hard work for the, although even that is controversial, but for the viewer. You don't want anybody, well, certainly we didn't want somebody who would watch WASH to be thinking, oh God, isn't a complicated thing how complicated was it to make? Rather, you just want people to go with the story or the narrative or the message of the piece. But for me, it was really interesting, first of all, first of all, it was the writing, indeed. So I had the idea to introduce a fictional character and also had the idea to say at the front that she's fictionalized because she's based on real people, but nobody, you see, I felt it was unethical to make the actual character who had teenage pregnancy and so on to go and start talking about it. So that really is a direct result of my sort of thinking and research, the PhD research, that I think we always, when you make documentaries, want to push people to push to tell you stories that maybe sometimes is best if they're left alone, and if you find other ways for that story to come forward as fiction. Or as fictionalized. So then, so having sort of written an outline of how this was going to go, then the issue of introducing the animation and different kinds of animation was also the idea, slightly speaks to Jeremy Hastings' comment just now, to speak to the notion that it's a group, that in the end, it's not just one person, it's a group of people, that there will be other stories that we are not hearing. But it gives you, again, subliminal message that there are different voices because the aesthetic is different. Similarly with the music, which we haven't talked much about, but there's again different people working on it. And there were some African musicians from Zimbabwe and some people from different places, so that of course it would seem, hopefully, that it works and it's cohesive, but there is this sort of multi-tonal thing to it, which I was hoping it would work, yeah. And so the research is, the practice research is both, and the knowledge being produced is to do with craft, yes, but it's more than that. And I think it's very important because very often I think as creative practice researchers, there's an attempt to put us in these boxes of that it's sort of craft, that it's about different exploration of different techniques. Yes, it has to be more than that. It has to be about ideas and the ideas have, in my view, have to underpin it for it to work well and survive and be inspirational for students, for research students, but also any students, really. I mean, today, somebody was talking at this class about trying to create a sea thing with like CGI and the person hasn't clearly, I mean, we're not talking some rocket science here, but actually didn't see deep impact, didn't even see Interstellar, these huge waves, and didn't know that what the sea could symbolize, talking about Jung and symbolism and passions. And so I mentioned a few things, and the student was just fascinated and wanted to learn more. We have some task here to say, okay, it's not boring, might not be useful this second, but it will be useful, I promise you, in your life.
Yeah, again, really fascinating points here. I think there's a question here. I'm just going to comment. I think it's really this idea of kind of transgressing these little labels we are often given, like you are this, you are that, this is your discipline, this is your discipline, this is what you see, this is what you have to do, and kind of finding a way to, as you say, transgress that in the attempt to create new knowledge, which I think is what we're wanting to do, and kind of try to find some kind of new entity which doesn't necessarily need to belong to one thing or another, and kind of has this own kind of legitimate place as the kind of creative research we do, and also have some kind of impact, which again is something which relates to academia. I'm just gonna very briefly, because I really love this work, because obviously it kind of reminds me a little bit of the work I did in Colombia with the Arhuaco community over there, and you've mentioned your positionality, how you thought about, you being a white European and a female and working in this kind of environment, and how really you say that in a very beautiful way in the film itself, that the film is about this, about that, but also about you as a filmmaker working in this community. And again, for me, it took me many years to realize that the film I made in Colombia was really primarily about me understanding my position as someone who just, again, a European filmmaker who just goes there and makes this film. And I wonder if you could maybe offer some more comments about it, and how perhaps that translated into the impact of the film on the community you worked with.
So thank you. I mean, the issue of us, it really is not a new issue, but that the fact that it's not new doesn't make it any easier. You remember Tri Minh Ha, who talks about that and she is a American Asian filmmaker, and she's working with people from her community, and yet because she's making the film, by the sheer fact of making the film, she's in a position of greater power. So she says, well, every time we do something about other people, in a way, it's also a way of silencing them, even though they speak. You're giving them the voice, but also in a way because you edit. And there's so many, discussions about it, and people say, oh, we can do the participatory, but it really only works if you share the power. And if you share the power, meaning creative power, then be prepared that everything will take forever, because people are not going to agree, that everybody has different ideas. And you could also, this would be a great project, but it would take a very long time, and one doesn't even know if the final result would work. In this project, because, and I, these are quite small projects really compared to the things that I did in the industry, but still for this to happen, and now that you're talking about it, maybe I will try and do something in which really, I have co-directed with people in Zimbabwe, but it was also very clear distinction. I was directing actors. Joe was in charge of the cinematography, but in the end, he gave up his credit because he was scared of the regime. So this is hopeless. And so, that didn't particularly work completely. In terms of if we were sitting here with a group of people from different cultures, it's not straightforward. It's not, because people would often say, I don't like thinking about you as a white European making the film in my community. To which Francisca would say, well, she's much more less she's really, really dramatically I want this person to work with me, and this is Agnieszka, and this will be it. But also, we had a little run-in over these sex scenes, and it's ridiculous because it was one image, which I write about in the article, which literally was a 3-second image. And as the issue of teenage pregnancy is so important, I thought it was quite important to visually mark it even. And she said, take it out or else we're not going to show it in the community. So we did, but I wasn't completely happy. The film is both being screened in Zimbabwe, but also in various, in America and here then everywhere in terms, and she showed it even unfinished to the parliamentary group in this country to make a point about what it might mean working with other people, but also, you know, at this moment in time, because it's relatively, well, it's a new piece of work. I don't know how, you know, I know it's been shown in schools in Zimbabwe. And also I know that Francisca has been showing it in both in this country, but also in America. And it appears to be well received.
Sorry, I was muted. And do you know if it has any effect on the way the community thinks about, you know, this kind of acceptance of this idea of having toilets in a community, or do they still stick with the idea, well, no, we just want to have this time for us to converse and
at
just...
the minute, I mean, the toilets have not been built yet. So the conversations, because it's also the issue of changing the community, and this is really quite problematic. People are saying they need to go and pick up their children.
I just
Of course.
Yeah. Is there anyone who would like to, because I keep just taking over because I find it really fascinating, but is there anyone in the... I also realized that people say that there was a problem with a link. Not sure why, I'm gonna check it. But is there anyone in the audience who would like to ask another question? Jess, is that another question, or because your hand is still up?
No, I'm sorry. I'm not paying attention in that way. I'm going to try and find out how to hide. I don't know how to take it off.
I think you just raise it again and it
Apology. Oh, right. Okay.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
No, it's gone now anyway.
Oh,
it's gone, is
somebody
it?
else's. Maza, Pilo
Okay.
Francisco.
Apologies.
Yeah. Give me a second, trying to turn on my mic. Can you hear me well? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, first, congratulations. Really provoking, inspiring presentation in general. I really like the idea of, you know, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, but also something else, something that's quite metaphysical as well.
Yes.
You know,
Exactly.
it's quite, yeah. But my question, I think, is quite connected with Agatha's question, first one, but more specific in the sense that I just wonder, when reading your article about tentacular thinking and surrealism for the film Wash, those ideas in philosophical or more conceptual framework, how it works for you can like embed in the process of producing your film during the long-term research, or that is something that after you craft your film, you hold the whole complex process of producing a film or documentary, or hybrid documentary, that you try to think about the connections of, you know, what's the philosophical, theoretical aspect. I just wonder how it's working your...
Okay, so this is a very good question, and thank you. And I think this connects, Agatha, to your question about working with students, and also kind of what we would say. I mean, it's kind of a fashionable phrase, but I'm going to say to you know, trusting the process. That if you expose people and ourselves to new ideas, to new thinking, metaphysical or psychoanalytical or ethical or philosophical, literature, other, then it will influence your work. You know, there's this, in a positive way, there is this dreadful, I don't know where it even comes from. It must come from some bizarre, rational, or I don't know, neoliberal thing, which says, oh, don't overburden people with too much kind of intellectual knowledge because it might destroy their creativity. How? What doesn't even make any sense. In what way would it destroy anybody's creativity? It's ridiculous. So if you I think expose young people to a variety of ideas, and then don't say go and put these ideas in your work, just expose them gently, and then they make something, you will see these ideas. And this is my answer to you. No, I don't. I work as a creative person, as an artist or creative researcher. I really rely heavily on my intuition, but my intuition is informed by all kinds of reading, learning, studying, and experience. And so with this, a particular project with WASH, I mean, really, if you think about it, there's literally nothing. You know, you're making something out of thin air. You know, it's one sentence. So guess what? We wanted people to build toilets. They said, no, what bizarre story is this? And then they say no because they want to talk to each other. That's it. I mean, it's literally 20 seconds. So then you have to think, okay, how can I make it into something more than is really? And this is a variety of, you know, going for walks and working in the garden and thinking, how can we do this? And some things then happen organically. And I would really say that is the best answer I can give you. So because I'm engaged with these ideas all the time, then they will, and I really like animation in terms of, I can't animate, but I like working with animators when there are difficult things to talk about, because that speaks to what Lacan will say, truth has a structure of fiction, he says. Truth has a structure of fiction, meaning some things you just cannot say in a straight line. Some you can, some you can't.
Of course. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, if I can provide another comment on this. This is so interesting because sometimes I think other projects are just so complicated, and you actually kind of have to do some kind of reverse engineering to what you said, rather than just having a beautifully simple thing and then kind of see how you can work around it to make it into film, which is really amazing. You kind of have this kind of messiness, which doesn't really make sense, and you kind of work backwards almost to kind of extract what the essence of the project is. So I really liked the kind of balance between this creative messiness and the simplicity of the ideas. That's really nice. So I think people are leaving right now. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say massive thank you to you, Agnieszka. It has been really amazing to have you here on board, and I have to check what happened with the links, and apologize for people who couldn't join. Obviously, for whoever hasn't read Agnieszka's article, I invite you to do this. It's really interesting, and then you can watch the whole short film. And I'm just gonna really briefly, I'm gonna take 1 minute literally just to share my screen to tell everyone what's happening on the next seminar. So the next seminar, which will happen on the 2nd, oh, that's not the right one, so my apologies. This is the wrong one once again. I am trying to share the screen from the first slide, which is not what I wanted. So from the current slide, and this is where we are. So our next session, which is going to happen on the last Wednesday of November, which is Wednesday the 30th, again, the same time, we're going to have Professor Erik Knudsen, and he's going to be talking about film practice research and impact. So you can read more about it in the program. Again, I will make sure that all the links are working following today. And again, once again, apologies if something didn't. So once again, thank you again, Agnieszka. Thank you everyone for joining the session. Again, it will be uploaded on YouTube probably today or the day after, because as I said, I don't have a desk right now, but I'll make sure it will be there very shortly. So thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. And hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Definitely.
All the best.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.